I'm going to create a very awkward situation, okay? So bear with me. We're going to be very awkward here just for a few moments. Courtney, I'm going to ask you to do something, okay? I want you to go right now and put your arm around your best friend in here. Not just a normal friend, but your best friend. Go find your best friend. Excuse me? Oh, okay. Well, I guess she's got for those of you online, she found Dan Luter. I'm sorry you don't have any friends. Wow. Wow. If you were being asked in a group like this to find your best friend, who would it be? I mean, would you look at the group and you say, well, they're my friend, but they're not my best friend. I was introduced yesterday to some folks in Kentucky, and the man who introduced me talked about our mission serve work. He introduced me as being on the board of directors for the Buckhorn Family Chip Ministry. And then he said, but most importantly, he is my friend. And I thought that was pretty cool. If you ask my granddaughter today, talked about your friend, and she comes home from school having a new best friend every day. On one particular day, it's Liam. On another day, it's who, Charlotte Ann or Brooke or one of the others. It all depends on how the day went. However, when we get with family and you ask her, who is your best friend? She always says, Courtney. Juju to her. So I had to create an alternate universe where I ask her, who is your best buddy? And she'll always say, me. We've indoctrinated them well, haven't we? We want to have that position well. Friday morning at John Leitner's funeral, I got to meet Ryan and Christy's newborn. He's not a newborn anymore. He's about 11 months. And if you know the Leitner family, you'll know that this is true. All of those girls have been infatuated with my mustache. At one time or another, Lily or Trinley would do this to me. And when I walked up, this little one went and he started giggling and he laughed. And I just went over, he was laughing at me, so I went over and picked him up, and the first thing he did was pull my mustache. And I said, you and I are going to be friends. What does it mean to be a friend? When you look in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see yourself as being a part of the friendship circle of Christ? Are you part of Christ's circle? Do you consider yourself to be his friend and that he is your friend? Listen, go to John chapter 15 with me, verse 15. Once again, I'm pulling out verses to kind of highlight these images. No longer do I call you slaves. Now, you have to pause there for a moment. The word slaves there is not a really good choice of selective words. The disciples of Jesus were never called his slaves. They were called his students. And a lot of times the rabbi and student would take on that role. The rabbi would take on the role of master, and the pupil would take on the role of slaves. And Jesus very well might have been saying to them, I am no longer going to consider you my pupils. I'm no longer going to consider you there for my benefit. I'm not going to call you slaves any longer. For the slave does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. The basis of friendship with Christ is not so much that we have buddied up or that we've done for each other or that we celebrate something in common, even though that's a part of friendship. It is the reality that Jesus chose us to reveal things to. I'm going to say some things to you that I'm not going to say to anyone else. You are going to be my friends. When we talk about friendship, I want us to think in terms of not just our friendship with each other, although we're going to use that as the model for the kind of friendship that Christ has with us. For example, if I were to ask, what is the good definition for a friend? These definitions come from high school students. Definition one who multiplies joy and divides grief. Let me translate that. One that makes me happy and not so much that brings grief into my life. One who understands our silence. A volume of sympathy bound up in cloth. I thought that was an interesting one. I didn't understand it. Somebody that is sympathetic to me. Somebody that understands my hurts. A watch that beats true and never runs down. That a friend is trustworthy. I have two clocks in my life that matter most. The one on my phone and the one on the dashboard of my car. I do not trust the one on my car. It always gains time, so it's probably always 5 to 6, 7 minutes ahead of real time. I don't trust it, but I do trust the one on my phone. That's what's being said. Someone that I can trust on a regular basis. The winner in this particular competition said, a friend is one who comes in when the whole world has gone out. Lawrence Blomans is that friend to me. Out of all of the friends that I had around me at a certain time of my life, there were a lot of them that were moving away from me, that were going out the door, who didn't want to be associated with. But Lawrence was the one who came to me, sat down, embraced me. He was the kind of guy that you could depend on no matter what. Now, I need to explain mine and Lawrence's relationship a little bit to you this morning. When I talked to him on the phone the other day, I saw it was him on the cell phone, and I answered the phone. Don't you ever scare me like that again. He'd had a heart attack. But Lawrence and I began to laugh. Lawrence was the guy at our church in Walterboro that I could ask him to do the impossible, and he would do it. Every year we would have a vacation Bible school, and we would create these elaborate decorations for the youth group. We would have, and I want you to understand what I'm saying, youth, 7th graders and above. We would register at least 100 youth in our vacation Bible school every summer. They couldn't wait to see what the room looked like. One year it was a pyramid. One year it was a cave. One year it was a space shuttle. We created all of these things. I went to Lawrence one day and I said, Lawrence, I want to build a door. And he said, okay. I want the door to be in the hallway so you can't get through it. I want it to look like a bookshelf. And I want it to have a secret opening that you have to find in order to make the wall swivel and will let you come down the hall. I told him that one Sunday after church. And he said, you want me to do what? And I went through it again because I thought it would be simple. But Lawrence worked on it. One day he came and said, come here, I want to show you something. And I walked up to the hallway that went down to the youth room, and there was a bookshelf that covered the whole hallway. You couldn't get in. He said, find the key. And I pushed and I probed and I did everything that I could to make that door. He says it swivels. You had to take a book off. You had to reach up under a shelf, and there was a little latch. And when you slid that latch, you could move the door. I thought, Lawrence, you did great. One year I said to him, I want you to put a waterfall in the youth room. And he looked at me again and said, you want me to do what? Don't worry, Lawrence. I saw it at a Japanese steakhouse I went to, and I stood there and I said, if anybody can do this, Lawrence can do it. I want to have a waterfall in the youth room that's running water the whole time. And he thought about it, And one Sunday I came in, he said, let's go to the youth room. And sure enough, there was a waterfall flowing. He's my friend. He was a friend that I could ask to do things, and he would always reply with, I'll give it a try, and often produced great results. When Jesus began to say to his disciples, I don't want you to be my slaves. I don't want you to be my students. I want you to be my friends. I want to be able to call on you. I want to be able to interact with you. I want to be able to tell you the deepest hurts that I have. I want to be able to tell you about my upcoming death. I want to be able to tell you that I'm going to be a suffering servant. I want to be able to give you details of what God's doing in my life, and I need for you to be there. And I need for you to understand. There's another great definition of friendship. It says this: a friend is one who knows where you are, understands where you've been, accepts who you've become, and gently still invites you to grow. A friend is someone who knows where you've been and still relates to you. A friend is someone who knows where you've been and understands it, also accepts you as to what you've become and where you are now, but is always tugging you to grow a little bit more. My friend Jesus, if I could introduce him to you, I would say something like this: here's a man that knows everything there is to know about me, and he still loves me. Here's a man that knows everywhere I have been, everything that I've said, everything that I've done. This man knows me in ultimate detail. He knows who I am right now. And in the midst of all of that, he still loves me. Do you remember that woman at the well? The woman at the well who was a Samaritan woman. Do you remember that? And Jesus says to his disciples, we got a need to go through Samaria. And his disciples said to him, why? We don't go to Samaria. We don't interact with those people. They're not our friends. We don't like them. They have a past. You see, they started marrying outside of Judaism. Those people are bad. We don't go there. We don't interact with them. We're not their friends. But Jesus said, we're going anyway. And they followed him into Samaria. And what's the first thing that he encounters? The most taboo subject that he could have encountered. First of all, it was a Samaritan at the well. It could have been a Samaritan man, and it still would have got the same results. Here stands a Samaritan, not just a Samaritan, but a woman Samaritan. That's bad. And not only that, she's there alone, which means she's not part of the community. The disciples said, too dangerous, don't go there. That's not good. I wonder how many friends we've missed because we're afraid of our reputation. I wonder how many people we could have encountered as friends that we just wouldn't cross over some of the lines that others have set for us. Not Jesus. He saw a friend that he hadn't met yet. And what did she say? When she went down into town and started explaining to them who she had met, she said, come see a man who knows everything there is to know about me and still talks to me. That's the kind of friendship that Jesus wants to develop with us. He knows who you are, and he knows what you've done. He knows what you've said. He knows that those times when you've been out of sorts. He knows those times when you've been on the high, and he knows those times when you've been on the low, and he still calls you friend. But not only that, he challenged that woman, did he not? He sent her back to start telling everybody who she'd met. And as she walked down to that village, and she said, come see a man. Come see a man that knows everything there is to know about my past. And he knows that I'm living with a man that I'm not married to. He knows what I'm doing right now. And he still talked to me. He still made me feel accepted. That's where Jesus began to grow her. Please understand what I'm saying to you today. When you enter into friendship with Jesus, it's not that you've become perfect and that you're on equal par with him. It's not that you get to say, let me tell you about my best friend Jesus. No. Your best friend Jesus chose you to be his friend. He said, I no longer want you to be considered my slaves, but I want you to be my friends. We didn't choose him to be our friend. He chose us to be his friend. And in the midst of that, he says, I know everything there is to know about you. I know where you're standing today, but I also know what your potential is for tomorrow. What did Jesus say to his disciples about that woman? He gathered his disciples together, and they're all scratching their heads. He's been talking to a woman. He's been alone with a woman at the well. She's a Samaritan woman, probably got a reputation because she's there by herself. How in the world is he going to overcome this? And you know what he said to his disciples? He said, look out there. Standing on a hill, looking over that valley. Look, the fields are white and ready for harvest. We very seldom get that far into the story. What was he saying? Look at all those white turbans that are coming out from their tents. Look at all those white robes of people. And by the way, they wore white because it reflected the heat, deflected the heat. Look at all that whiteness that's down there. May the Lord send more laborers just like her. Do you know what he just said to those disciples? I want you to be like her. What? Can you imagine Peter? You want me to be like her? Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying. I want God to provide more people just like her. You and I are those people. We have flaws. We have insecurities. We have holes in our armor. We're not perfected because we come into Jesus' presence. We almost come into his presence as the most effective as we can be. And Jesus says, I want you to be my friend. Do you remember back in elementary school? Some of your memories will go back to that, won't you? I remember a time when we used to pass out those little Valentine things. You'd go to the store and you'd buy a bunch of them in a packet, and your mama would go home and help you put everybody's name on that. And then usually you had a bag, and everybody had a little bag, and you went around and you put the Valentines in the bag. How many remember that? Do you? Some of you were deprived in your childhood, I see. Oh, it was always fun. But one day there was one little boy whose mother knew that no one ever brought him Valentines. He was the kid from the other side of the tracks. He was the kid that was often different. And because he was different, and some would even say defective, needed medication. We've heard that terminology, haven't you? She always worried that he would never have Valentines in his bag. Even the teacher wouldn't cover. Sometimes teachers would put those Valentines in bags of children that were not always well accepted by everybody else to make sure that everybody had Valentines when they went home. But on the night before Valentine's Day, she sat at the table and she asked, who are your friends? And one by one, he began to name everybody in the class. And she would write their name on the envelope. And he would stick the Valentine in the envelope, lick it, and seal it. And she knew how disappointed he was going to be the next day. Went to school and had his Valentines. They had a party. And sure enough, when he came home, his bag was empty. No one gave him a Valentine that day. And she felt for him and began to tear up. And the little boy heard her say, "Not even one?" He said, "I didn't miss anybody. Every Valentine I took, I gave away. Everybody got one." He didn't even realize that he hadn't received. It was important that everybody got one. That's the relationship that we have with Jesus. Jesus doesn't wait for us to give him the Valentine love first. Jesus chooses us even while we are yet sinners. Let me paraphrase that text just for a moment, okay? Understand that I'm taking it out of context and I'm using it for my purpose right now. Even while you were defective, even while you were imperfect, even while you had flaws, even while you weren't loved by anyone else, I gave myself for you. Christ died for you. Let me tell you about that loving relationship. Jesus chooses us to be his friends, and he doesn't want to leave. No, not one. He wants to go to the Father and say, "I didn't miss a one. I gave every one of them a Valentine. I gave every one of them an expression of my friendship." Friends make life complete, do they not? My friends are the people that help me get through life sometimes. And that's no exception to the rule for Jesus. When Jesus says, "I choose to be your friend," he is the one that I lean on in some very complicated times of life. It's his words that mean something to me. It's his teachings that guide me. It is his spirit that helps me get through some lonely and difficult times in life. Sometimes friendship allows us to be ourselves, even while we're in the midst of the most complicated things of life. There's not everybody that we put our guard down to, is there? A lot of folks, we don't want them to know the interpersonal workings of our lives. Every now and then, Jesus says to us, "Go ahead and share what's good in your heart, because I already know what's there." And I get the ability to just be myself. I don't have to put on airs for my friend. Friendship gives us an exemption. It gives us a perception of God's love for us. Now, mind you, not everybody's going to be a good friend. In the life that I live, in the life that you live, there are some that we have trusted with our friendship, and they have failed us at that, and we know that. Not everybody is going to be a best friend. Not everybody is going to be a trusted friend. But when you find that one, when you find the one that loves as Christ loves us, then we begin to understand what it meant when it says, "For God so loved the world." I married my best friend. Still is my best friend. I got a lot of friends, but my best friend is my wife. And that's because she knows me. She knows all the flaws. She knows all the good things. She knows all the bad things. And yet she still allows me to be myself. The other day, we woke up as we normally do. She was about to go off to work, and as she always does, she came to give me a kiss. And after she gave me the kiss, I said, "I don't feel good. I think I'm going to take a COVID test." And she said, "After you kissed me?" I said, "Well, if you don't have it already, I'm not sure that one kiss is going to make it any different." That's who we are. We love each other. We trust each other. God provides that for us. When we begin to understand that the concept of loving one another is a concept that God chose to love us even while we were imperfect, sent his son to demonstrate that love to us even while we were imperfect, and that one who speaks on his behalf says to us, "You're not his slaves. You're not just his creation. He wants you to understand through me that he chooses you to be his friend." When I begin to think about the love of Christ, there's 3 or 4 things that I want us to understand today. That first and foremost, the love of Christ is that which gives. That having Jesus as a friend means that he gives. He doesn't expect an awful lot in return because it's unconditional. That what Jesus does for me, he does. I say it this way often, and I want you to hear it again. There's absolutely nothing, I want you to hear those words, absolutely nothing that you can do that will cause God to love you any more than he already does. And there's absolutely nothing, say it again, absolutely nothing that you can do that will cause God to love you less. He loves you unconditionally. Jesus loves you unconditionally. Jesus chose you to be his friend unconditionally. You don't even have to send him a Christmas card. You don't have to remember his birthday. You don't have to do things because you're trying to earn his acceptance of you. He accepts you just the way you are. There's nothing you can do that will cause him to not be your friend. There's nothing that you can do to earn his friendship. He chose you. And he calls you his friend. Now here's the problem. At that point, I began to ask myself, how good of a friend am I to him? Do you hear me? How good of a friend am I to him? That's where the struggle of life comes for all of us. That we want him to be our friend because it's unconditional towards us. But sometimes we also need to ask the question, how good of a friend am I to the one who loves me unconditionally? There's no way to earn his love, and there's no way to get his love away from you. We need to stop. Please listen to me. We need to stop telling our children, Jesus don't love you when you lie. You just lied to your child. God doesn't like you when you misbehave. Yes, he does. He loves you unconditionally, even when you misbehave. God doesn't love you when you go to places like that. Yes, he does. God loves you unconditionally. Sometimes your friend will go places that you don't think they will, simply because they are your friend. The love of Christ is a giving kind of friendship. The friendship that Christ offers is one where he's also willing to say to his disciples, no greater love does a man have than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends. Do you hear that? There's no greater love than the kind of love that I have for you, that I will lay down my life for you. How many friends would you really lay your life down for? I mean, that's not a rhetorical question. That's one that takes some soul searching, doesn't it? Do I have any friends that I would lay down my life for, that I would die in their place? And yet Jesus says, the kind of love that I have for you is the kind that I will die in your place. The kind of love that Christ has for us is one that he chooses for us to have. He allows us this special status of being able to call him our friend. Have you ever met any name droppers? Do you know what I mean when I say name droppers? They want you to know who they know. I have met some celebrities in my life. So I'm going to become a name dropper and let you know who they are. You know, I know Strom Thurmond, who used to be a senator from the state of South Carolina, shook his hand. I know the president of Charleston Southern University. And at times, the most important person that I knew in my life was the head of the highway patrol in the state of South Carolina. I used his name frequently. He was a member of my church. I would get stopped on the interstate. And by the way, I knew most of the highway patrolmen in South Carolina by their first name. And I would get stopped and I'd say, hey, do you know? And I'd use that name. You know, he's a member of my church. Some of them would say, I'm just going to let you off with a warning. And others were very stubborn. And they'd write the ticket anyway, thinking that I was testing them. I like name dropping. I know some celebrities that I've met. I met Bob Seger one time, my favorite rock and roll musician, singer. I met him backstage, shook his hand, conversed with, had supper that night. Okay? Do you know what? None of those people could call me by name if they ever met me. None of them. I don't think Bob Seger has ever gone on stage and said, I know Steve Brown. Are you following me here? I don't think that any politician has ever said, oh, I'm a friend with Steve Brown. I'll call him and we can get something done. No. Sometimes the benefit is only one way when I use their name. Do you know what it is to be able to say, listen to me now, to be able to say, Jesus is my friend. And if you were to ask Jesus, do you know Steve Brown? He would say, I surely do. I know everything there is to know about Steve Brown. Did you understand that impact? I used Jesus' name knowing that he could use mine. I know if you ask Jesus, do you know Steve? He's going to say yes. I know how many hair is on his head right now. A lot less than there used to be. I can tell you what he asked for this morning when he prayed. I can tell you what's hurting his heart right now. I can tell you the struggle that's going in his life right now. Why? Because I call him my friend. When we begin to share and we begin to understand that, it's when our lives take on a whole new meaning, doesn't it? Because I'm his friend, I also want to be true to that friendship. And so there are some requirements, not that are necessary for him to call me friend, but there are some things that I do because I feel obligated to my friend. John Lee is my friend. John Lee was hurting this week. His wife was in intensive care on life support in Taiwan. And many of you know John is somewhat, doesn't show his emotions all the time. And we had the conversation and he had texted me. And then he called me and he said, Steve, I need you to help me with something. I need a favor. And I said, sure, John, you're my friend. What? I'll do anything you need. And I'm thinking, pray for my family. There's all these things that I thought was going to come. He said, will you pick up my trash cans on Friday and put them back in my garage while I'm in Taiwan with my dying wife? And I thought to myself, that's all. But yet in his mind, he was going through the things that he had done on a daily basis. And he trusted me to get his trash cans put back in his garage. And then he burst out in tears. On the phone, that was the first good cry that I had seen out of John in this whole thing. He didn't call me to ask about putting trash cans up. He called because he was hurting. And when I said to him, John, we're praying for you. We know this is difficult. We're here for you. Call us if you need us. So I got Kevin and Teresa to go put the trash cans in on Friday because I was going to be out of town. But I called John, and we have a friendship that he would do anything for me ever I ask. John is my computer guy. I called him one day and I said, John, I need a new laptop computer. What do you think I should get? Have any of you ever asked John to help you with a computer? He speaks a language that I have no idea what it means. And he said, what you need is blah, 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 blah. I said, John, go to the Dell website. That's where I am right now. Point out the one that I need, and I'll just order it. I love John. I love John. And I would do anything for him. But my Jesus has done so much more for me than even John. And the response that I often have is to ignore what he's done for me and do nothing in return. Jesus has chosen me. He's chosen you to be his friend. He wants to work with you in and through your life. He wants to be a part of who you are because that's what friends do. And we need to understand that being networked with him as our friend means that he in turn has some input into our lives. And that we in turn have the opportunity to do something for our friend. Not our creator, not our God, not master of the universe. But we have an opportunity on the level of friendship to do something for your friend. I like that. I no longer want to call you slaves. I'm going to elevate you. I'm going to give you an increase in your popularity. I'm going to call you my friends. One last thing. Was that beneficial to his disciples? To be a friend of Jesus may not have been the best thing for them. For many of them were persecuted. Friends are people who walk in when everybody else walks out. When the whole world was walking out, who was walking in? Peter, James, John, some of those other disciples, ever so slowly began to walk back into the life of their friend. When the whole world had forsaken me or you, when everything else was at its bottom, I knew that Jesus was walking in and not leaving me alone. He is my friend. When I look in the mirror, I can say I am a friend of Christ. He chose me to be his friend. Sometimes it's not easy to have those games where you choose. Growing up, I remember when we used to throw a bat. Do you remember that? And you would play this game. And whoever got on top got to pick the player first. And who did they always pick first, Dan? The best player on the field, wouldn't they? And I never was picked first. Never was. I was always picked after the guy in the wheelchair. You know, he got picked and then I got picked. And when I got picked, it always went something like this. I don't want him, you take him. Well, I don't want him on my team either, you take him. And they'd flip a coin to see who got me. The other day, last Saturday, I went to Horizon Baseball, and Kyle became my best friend. Out of all the people on the field that he could have picked to be his buddy, he picked me. I was picked first. Went over to a little guy named Leland. He didn't want a buddy. Didn't need a buddy. He wasn't going to play at all. And I sat down and sit next to the bench and just talked to him a little bit. The next thing, he had my finger, and we were going out on the ball field. I got picked. I got chosen. Man, does that not intensify when I say to you, Jesus picked you. He chose you not to be his slave, not to be his servant. He chose you to be his friend. Dear Father, let us just for a moment bathe in that concept. That you chose us, you picked us, you allowed us to be your friend, and all the benefits that come with that. We pray, Father, that you would make us sensitive to that and to ask the question, how good of a friend have I been? To the one that loves me unconditionally, does for me even before I ask, knows everything there is about me, and still calls me his friend. Please guilt my heart. Please guilt my mind. Please guilt my emotion when I ask the question, how good of a friend am I? Does that relationship go two ways? Have we been picked, but have not picked him? Amen.